He was an actor, a radio announcer, and a lifeguard who once saved 77 lives. At a moment when America felt anxious, divided, and uncertain, Ronald Reagan stepped onto the world stage. Ronald Reagan did not look or sound like a traditional politician. He smiled easily, spoke warmly, and often joked. To supporters, he was the great communicator. To critics, a dangerously cheerful conservative. But to millions of Americans, he felt familiar, almost like family. This is not just the story of a presidency. It is the story of a man who believed words could heal, humor could disarm fear, and faith in America could restore confidence. He believed leadership required optimism, not anger, and that calm confidence could steady a nation more effectively than outrage ever could. Reagan's true talent may have been emotional intelligence, knowing when to reassure, when to challenge, and when to laugh. He understood Americans wanted leaders who believed in them, not leaders who spoke down to them. Long before historians would debate his legacy, Reagan sensed that leadership was as much emotional as it was political. Supporters felt he restored pride. Critics worried optimism could hide hard truths. Even then, reactions to Reagan were deeply divided. What no one yet knew was how lasting his influence would become, or how powerfully he would reshape the national mood. Ronald Wilson Reagan was born in 1911 in Tampico, Illinois, a quiet Midwestern town with no wealth, no power, and no hint that history would one day call his name. His father, Jack Reagan, was a charming shoe salesman who struggled with alcoholism. Young Ronald witnessed both warmth and pain, learning empathy early in life. His mother, Nell Reagan, was deeply religious and endlessly optimistic. She believed every person had worth and that goodness could overcome hardship. The family moved often during difficult economic times. Eventually, they settled in Dixon, Illinois, a place Reagan later called the happiest home he ever knew. As a teenager, Reagan worked summers as a lifeguard on the Rock River. Over 7 summers, he saved 77 lives, calmly responding when others panicked. Those long days taught him vigilance, responsibility, and quiet confidence. Reagan never bragged about those rescues. He simply believed it was his duty. In school, Reagan played football, acted in plays, and became student body president. He was not the smartest student, but he was trusted and well-liked. Friends remembered him as cheerful, steady, and unfazed by pressure. Even early on, Reagan believed attitude shaped destiny. After college, during the depths of the Great Depression, Reagan found work as a radio sports announcer, describing games he often never saw. Using only imagination and timing, he recreated entire baseball games from telegraph updates, pausing for dramatic effect as if the crowd were roaring. Listeners loved him. Reagan learned how to paint pictures with words, how pacing mattered, and how storytelling could transport people beyond their troubles. Those skills carried him to Hollywood in 1937, where he signed with Warner Brothers and began appearing in dozens of films over the next 2 decades. Reagan was rarely a superstar, but he consistently played decent, trustworthy characters, men audiences could root for without hesitation. In Knut Rock'n, All American, his line, "Win one for the Gipper," became immortal, eventually merging fiction with Reagan's own public identity. During World War II, Reagan served in the Army Air Forces making training films. He never saw combat, but he understood morale and message mattered. After the war, Reagan became president of the Screen Actors Guild, navigating labor disputes and rising fears of communist influence in Hollywood. At the time, Reagan was a Democrat. He admired Franklin Roosevelt and believed government could help people when used wisely. But as years passed, Reagan grew uneasy with bureaucracy, regulation, and the feeling that government was drifting away from ordinary citizens. That transformation accelerated in the 1950s when he hosted General Electric Theater and toured factories across the nation. Reagan listened to workers who felt suffocated by taxes and rules. On long train rides, he he rewrote speeches, refining ideas about freedom and responsibility. In 1962, Reagan officially became a Republican. 2 years later, he delivered a televised speech called "A Time for Choosing." The speech warned America stood at a crossroads. Reagan spoke calmly, confidently, and with moral clarity that stunned viewers. "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny," he said, framing politics not as policy alone, but as a test of national character. That night, Ronald Reagan became a national figure. Donations poured in. Supporters felt they had discovered a voice for their values. In 1966, Reagan was elected governor of California. Skeptics doubted an actor could govern. Reagan quietly proved them wrong. He cut taxes, challenged bureaucracy, and showed a calm steadiness during turbulent times, earning respect even from opponents. By 1980, America was weary. Inflation soared, confidence collapsed, and the Cold War seemed endless. Reagan promised renewal. When Reagan took office in 1981, he was 70 years old. Critics questioned his age. Reagan responded with humor, not defensiveness. After surviving an assassination attempt weeks into his presidency, Reagan joked to surgeons, "Please tell me you're Republicans." The nation laughed and breathed easier. Humor became Reagan's way of reassuring Americans that things would be all right. In meetings, Reagan told dry, understated jokes, often poking fun at himself. Staff recalled laughter breaking tension during crises. He once joked that politics was the second oldest profession and bore a striking resemblance to the first. Once asked whether he was worried about age, Reagan replied he would not exploit his opponent's youth and inexperience. The room erupted in laughter. The issue vanished. Reagan understood humor could neutralize fear faster than argument. Reagan believed humor created trust. He saw it not as distraction, but as leadership, lowering defenses so difficult truths could be heard. Reagan believed optimism was a moral duty. He kept jelly beans in the Oval Office and remembered names, making people feel seen. Staff recalled Reagan greeting janitors and secretaries by name, treating every role as essential to the mission. Even critics often admitted they liked him personally. Reagan made politics feel human again, restoring trust through tone as much as action. When Reagan entered the White House, supporters saw a leader who radiated confidence. Critics, however, worried his optimism masked simplicity in a dangerously complex world. Journalists debated whether Reagan truly understood policy or merely performed it. Some called him detached. Others underestimated the discipline behind his calm demeanor. Inside the Oval Office, aides observed a president who listened carefully, asked concise questions, and trusted advisors, but always made the final decision himself. Reagan governed through clear principles rather than detailed micromanagement. He believed leaders should set direction, then allow capable people to execute. He once said leaders should have thick skin and soft hearts, strong enough to endure criticism, gentle enough to remain human. Economically, Reagan's tax cuts sparked fierce debate. Supporters hailed renewed growth, while critics warned deficits and inequality would rise. Even opponents acknowledged Reagan's communication skill. He framed complex economic theories in simple language Americans could understand and repeat. At press conferences, Reagan often disarmed hostile questions with dry humor, smiling before delivering a carefully measured response. Once, when accused of ignoring critics, Reagan joked that he listened carefully to everyone, especially those who disagreed loudly. The Cold War dominated Reagan's presidency. He spoke boldly against communism, calling the Soviet Union an evil empire. Some feared his rhetoric would escalate conflict. Others believed it clarified moral stakes that previous leaders had blurred. Yet Reagan surprised critics by pursuing arms reduction talks with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, blending toughness with diplomacy. Foreign leaders noticed this too. Reagan joked with allies, teased adversaries lightly. and used warmth to soften otherwise firm positions. At summits, Reagan often joked to ease tension. One advisor recalled Reagan breaking silence with humor, just as talks reached deadlock. Reagan's belief was simple. Peace required strength, but also trust, verified carefully and never taken for granted. In 1987, Reagan stood before the Berlin Wall, challenging Gorbachev directly to tear it down, stunning even his own speechwriters. Critics initially dismissed the speech as theatrical. History later judged it prophetic. When the wall fell 2 years later, supporters credited Reagan's moral clarity. Critics pointed to economic collapse inside the Soviet system. Both were true. Reagan was neither sole architect nor passive observer. He was a catalyst in a larger historical moment. At home, Reagan faced controversy over social policy, civil rights, and government spending. Protests followed him throughout his presidency. He acknowledged disagreement openly, believing dissent was proof of freedom rather than failure. When asked if criticism bothered him, Reagan joked that if everyone agreed with him, he would worry something was wrong. Even during scandal, Reagan maintained composure. During the Iran-Contra affair, critics accused him of poor oversight. Reagan accepted responsibility publicly, though many believed he was shielded by loyalty and trust in subordinates. Supporters saw humility. Critics saw negligence. Reagan saw leadership as owning outcomes without abandoning optimism. Despite setbacks, Reagan's personal approval remained high. Americans continued to like him, even when questioning his policies. To supporters, Reagan restored American pride. To critics, he oversimplified history. Both agreed he changed the national mood. As his presidency neared its end, historians began debating Reagan's place in history, arguments growing sharper with time. Some viewed him as a transformational conservative icon. Others saw him as a skilled messenger riding larger forces. To many conservatives, Reagan became a symbol, sometimes simplified, sometimes mythologized beyond the man himself. What could not be denied was Reagan's impact on tone. He reshaped how presidents spoke to the American people. In his farewell address, Reagan spoke gently of America as a shining city on a hill, strong because it welcomed hope. He did not claim perfection. He claimed possibility and asked Americans to believe in it together. Reagan's America was imperfect, unfinished, and hopeful, a place always striving toward its better angels. He asked Americans not to fear the future, but to shape it with confidence and courage. After leaving office, Reagan faded from public view, but his words remained embedded in the national vocabulary. When he announced his Alzheimer's diagnosis, Americans across political lines responded with compassion and respect. In his final letter, Reagan wrote he had no regrets and eternal optimism for America's future. Away from cameras, Reagan was quieter, reflective, and deeply loyal. Friends described a man who listened more than he spoke, content with long silences. He wrote letters by hand, often late at night, responding personally to ordinary Americans who shared hopes, fears, and gratitude. Nancy Reagan remained his closest advisor and protector. Their partnership, forged through decades, grounded him emotionally and politically. Critics sometimes mocked Reagan's sentimentality. Supporters believed it was sincerity in an era growing increasingly cynical. Reagan's humor never disappeared. Even in retirement, he joked gently about aging, saying memory loss had at least freed him from grudges. Friends recalled Reagan laughing easily, telling familiar stories again and again, each time with the same warmth and timing. Reagan rarely demonized opponents. He believed persuasion worked better than humiliation, and disagreement did not require hostility. Former aides recalled Reagan refusing to read harsh editorials, preferring instead to focus on long-term purpose. As years passed, Reagan's image softened. Younger generations encountered him not as president, but as cultural memory. Documentaries replayed his speeches, revealing a voice steady, hopeful, and unmistakably confident in America's future. His jokes endured too, dry, self-deprecating, and perfectly timed, reminding audiences leadership need not be humorless. Historians debated whether Reagan shaped events or was shaped by them. Few disputed his intuitive grasp of the American psyche. Some historians argued Reagan oversimplified global realities. Others countered that clarity, not complexity, gave his leadership power. In times of doubt, he offered reassurance. In moments of fear, he offered humor. In periods of division, he offered optimism. Reagan believed optimism was not naive. It was strategic. Hope mobilized people faster than fear ever could. He often said leadership was not about power, but persuasion, patience, and faith in people's better instincts. He believed the presidency was not about dominance, but direction, guiding rather than commanding. Ronald Reagan trusted Americans to rise to challenges if reminded of their strength. When Ronald Reagan died in 2004, Americans paused. The reaction crossed party lines, revealing shared respect. World leaders remembered him as firm yet personable, serious yet approachable, ideological yet open to dialogue. His state funeral reflected that balance, solemn dignity mixed with warmth and gratitude. Reagan once said he hoped people would remember him as someone who tried to leave the world better than he found it. That humor reflected perspective, an understanding that power is temporary, but character endures. Whether admired or challenged, his presidency invites reflection on leadership rooted in belief rather than control. In an age of noise, Reagan's calm voice still echoes, reminding history that tone can shape destiny. To supporters, Reagan symbolized confidence restored. To critics, a reminder that charm can shape history as powerfully as policy. Ronald Reagan believed leadership meant lifting people's eyes toward what could be, not dwelling on what had been lost. In the end, Ronald Reagan's greatest legacy may not be policy, but belief. Belief in people. Belief in freedom. Belief that humor and kindness could coexist with strength. He reminded a weary nation that optimism was not weakness, it was leadership. Ronald Reagan remains a figure viewed from many angles, each revealing something different, each worth examining. History continues to debate him, but history also remembers how he made people feel. And for millions, Ronald Reagan made America feel hopeful again.